Welcome to Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage.
Howdy and welcome to Retro Groove. I'm Adam.
And I'm Liam.
And this is a podcast where we talk about music that stands the test of time. Welcome to our end of the year special, our 12th episode of our second season. Thank you so much, all of you, for listening this year and for trucking along with us as we figure this whole thing out. We're really appreciative of all of you. And as we come into this new year, we wish you the best. We hope for a great 2023. 2022 had some ups and downs for sure. Yeah. But we're looking forward to bigger and better things. However, on this episode, as we say, a podcast where we talk about music that stands the test of time, we look at albums of the year, not just for this year, which is fun and something that we should do and we like doing. But we're going in the Wayback Machine. We're going to go back.
Retro.
This is retro. We're going back 50 years, 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, and 10 years. So during this episode, we will be talking about, discussing, and announcing our personal favorite albums from 1972, 82, 92, 2002, 2012, and then this year.
Yeah. How many? I wasn't born or alive for two of these decades. Are we at a point where you are you entering the world here? I'm trying to remember the year you're born.
I was born in 82. So
there it is. All right. Nice.
So I'm here.
And you came out listening to Duran Duran's Rio.
I definitely heard it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it is a favorite of mine. We'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah.
But before we start getting into everything here, Liam, how are things going with you? How was your Christmas? What's going on right now?
Christmas was pretty good. Had some bugs flying around the house. Family's just sniffling and coughing, but we made it through Christmas without too much damage there. The weird thing is, so I have a great present that I was given that is appropriate for this podcast. I've had a legacy turntable that was handed down to me. I have nostalgia for it from my grandfather, and it's really starting to show its age. And I got a really nice Audio Technica turntable, and now I'm going to go all out and get the furniture for it and all that. Like I'm looking forward to like indulging this year in fleshing out my stereo system and doing it up right. And I'm very excited about that. However, as awful as this is going to sound, I would say that the gift that I'm honestly most excited about is one that I gave to my wife, which is an ice maker, which sounds crazy.
Wow, no,
right?
It doesn't.
Like I didn't think I could ever want or need an ice maker because my freezer does that.
Right.
But she asked for this thing. It makes those little nugget, like the softer kind of nugget ice, dude. Game changer. Like
total game changer.
Put that in a soft drink, like put that in some seltzer or something. Wow. So we've got a little scoop in our kitchen now. I mean, it is like one of the most bougie things I've done for myself ever is to have a designated ice maker. Very excited to have this.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, there's a place locally that we will literally go there just to get ice.
To get that ice.
Exactly that little crunchable nugget ice. And that's a thing. Like I saw recently like a contest to give one away. and I think it was like one of our local pizza places, and it's like the
Nice.
same ice that they use in the restaurant. And it's not an indulgence at all. I totally get it. That's wonderful. It's
I'm
great
digging
because the freezer doesn't make that kind. Even if you have the one that makes so-called crushed ice, it doesn't make the little
It's
crunchy.
the cubes.
Yeah,
they just
it's
break
still-
the cubes.
Exactly.
It's not the same. Yeah.
Not the same. You still
Yeah.
don't want to crunch on those; it'll hurt your teeth.
Yeah.
Or so
What
I'm
about-
told.
What about you? You have a good Christmas?
Yeah, we had a good Christmas. We're winding down. The kids are even telling me that they're ready to go back to school. So it's
Wow.
yeah, they're ready. They're bored, and there's only so much you can do right
Yeah.
now. So because I'm back to work, so there's really not a whole lot for them to do. But we'll have the occasional. They got some Nerf guns this year, so we've been having Nerf wars around the house and enjoying.
That's awesome.
So we got the Mario Kart expansion pass, so we've been playing all the new
Nice.
courses, and we've been having a lot of fun. But yeah, you can tell they're getting stir crazy. They're ready to go back to school.
Yeah.
So.
It's awesome.
But we're excited about the new year. I'm excited about this episode. I've been looking forward to this for months now. It's one of my favorite episodes
Same.
formats that we do. And I poured over so many of these this year.
Yeah.
My kids were getting annoyed with me listening to stuff in the car that I don't normally sit and listen to.
Right,
They're
right.
like, Dad, what is this? Like,
It's got to do
it'll
the
be-
refresh. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun doing the prep for it. A lot of listening to stuff I haven't listened to in a long time, and it was honestly super enjoyable. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, man.
So to recap last year, for those that didn't listen to it, or I kind of forgot anyway most of what we had landed on last year. But so these were the albums that we landed on last year. So obviously last year was 2021. We went back to 1971 and went forward from there.
Right.
My pick for 1971 was David Bowie's Hunky Dory.
Great one.
Liam's pick was The Who, Who's Next.
Yeah. I stand by it. Yeah.
As you certainly should.
Yeah. I looked back over these the other day and I was just like, yeah, I'm good with all these picks.
It's good picks.
It's good to look back. Sometimes you hear your voice or you read your old journals and you're like, man, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
But I looked at this and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
This is great.
Good
Yeah.
picks for sure. For 1981, I had Men at Work, Business as Usual.
Right. I didn't see that one coming. Yeah.
And it came up on a lot of 1982 lists that I was looking at, and I was like, hold on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely a 1981 album. I think there were certain regions that came out in 82, but the initial release was 81. So we're leaving it in 1981 because we don't need it to win 2 years in a row.
Right.
And Liam had The Police, Ghost in the Machine, which was a
Classic
surprise pick
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of these things where like the conversation doesn't necessarily come up. I mean, music is so expansive and there's so many different things we can talk about when we talk about
Yeah.
music. So I don't think we'd ever talked about The Police before. And this was just the perfect opportunity. Like I grew up listening to them. My mom, like that was one that one of the few artists that my mom and I bonded over,
Yeah.
And
And
that
that's like
album's
the
just incredible.
that's the only Police album that I like have and listen to or like care to listen to.
Yeah.
So that was good. A good year. Then for 91, I had My Bloody Valentine's Loveless, and Liam went all metalhead.
I did. I went with Metallica's self-titled, this is the Black Album.
Yes.
I love that album.
That was kind of a surprise for me too, because I don't think we'd ever really talked about Metallica before either.
Yeah, I don't think we'd talked much about it, but they're one of those bands I fell absolutely in love with in high school, and then dug back into it and was like, oh my god, this band's incredible.
Awesome. Well,
So, yeah.
timeless, as these albums should be going back this far.
Yeah.
But that was a really good pick. And then 2001, I ended up landing. That was a tough year for me. There was a lot going on that year. Not surprisingly, 2002 I think was my most difficult year to come to a personal consensus on this year as well.
Yeah.
But my 2001 pick was Gorillaz, their self-titled debut.
Mm-hmm.
And
mine was Jay-Z's The Blueprint, bringing Hove up in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. Lots of like early Kanye exposure in that. Like just like the first few times that I didn't even know I was listening to Kanye production.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, I think a lot of people consider that kind of his best work.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But
yeah.
I mean, there's
Career
lots of
defining.
albums and lots of differing opinions.
Yeah. Highs and lows. Yeah.
And then we had 2011. I ended up going with Bon Iver's self-titled, not their debut album, but it is their self-titled full length that came out that year.
Yeah.
Which in hindsight, I'm okay. Like it's a great album. I haven't listened to it at all this year, I don't think. So I don't know if that's going to stick.
Okay.
For my 2011, and I don't, in 9 years we might come back to it and it might be something different. But it's still a solid pick.
Yeah, maybe that's like 2022 just wasn't a Bon Iver year. You fluctuate. I went with Adele's 21, which I still love, but I don't know. I haven't listened to a lot of Adele either. There's I come and go on her. I definitely have times where I rediscover her music and it just floors me. But, I don't think I've really listened to that this year either.
Well, if I was going to listen to some Adele, it would definitely be that album.
Yeah, that's the one.
The new one didn't really click with me.
Yeah, it was weird. Yeah. I'm sure it did very well, It's exciting that she's still making music, but there is something weird there. I was talking to somebody about that the other day. I just don't know. I'm not sure what her place in music history is at this point. Obviously it's massive and history making, but is it a Vegas residency or is it Madonna? Like, I don't know. Is she Celine Dion? Like, I don't know what happens next with Adele. We're at an interesting point here, and I would assume that we don't hear from her for a little while too.
Well, she was supposed to do the Vegas residency thing, right? And then there was some rescheduling, she dropped out of it.
Yeah.
So I could see she seems to kind of. She's still very, very highly regarded, but it's the whole Celine Dion thing. Like, there was nobody bigger than Celine Dion. In like when Titanic came out, and it was just like this is the biggest thing ever.
Right.
So I feel like, but she's still highly regarded today, and still, So I feel like that may be more kind of the path that she's headed towards. But she might surprise us. Who knows? She's still young and super talented, so we might see some more interesting stuff from her that shakes things up a bit down the road. You never know.
Yeah.
But super solid picks. For 2021, my ultimate pick for the year was Arlo Parks' Collapsed in Sunbeams. And I would not go so far as to say I regret my decision. It's a super great album, pushes music forward, I believe. I have listened to it this year, but when it came down to it last year, it was between Arlo Parks and Snail Mail. And I tell you what, I've probably listened to 4 times as much Snail Mail this year.
Really?
Than Arlo Parks. Lots of Snail Mail this year.
Okay.
It's almost like it was one of my favorites from last year, but it's hitting different this year.
Yeah. That's always the difficult thing with anything like this. Once you get that close to something where you don't get enough distance, that's with anything that happened with the Game Awards where God of War came out and won everything. And they're like, this has been out for 3 weeks,
Yeah. No one's beaten the game yet. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's tough. I wouldn't be surprised looking back on something from last year. I went with Tyler, the Creator's Call Me If You Get Lost. I still stand by that.
Yeah,
but
that was
I do
the pick.
think, I do think that there are some albums that I probably missed and have listened to more this year. But
anything that sticks out or.
No, I just remember like looking at this list and I was just like, yeah, that feels good, but there's definitely things that I wish I'd jotted them down because I was flipping through my CD wallet in the car, And I was just like, oh yeah, this one. Yeah, this one's really good.
Yeah.
But it's good, totally going to escape me now.
It'll come back.
Yeah.
It always does. Well, that was our recap of last year. So are you ready to
Oh, I'm ready.
dig in here? Okay, so we're hitting the Wayback Machine.
Yeah.
We are going back to 1972.
Yeah. 72 is a big year. 72.
Big year.
72 has something that is deep in the nerd world of things, but you don't realize how much it actually impacted our experience with music, because that's when the federal government begins the protection of sound recording copyrights. And so artists actually, they don't have to worry about getting various payments or monitoring things or having to go state to state to control their rights. It gave artists a lot more control over their music and kind of streamlined things a lot better. And so after 72, I would say you start to see almost the commercialization of music kick up into a new like a new ramp.
Oh, certainly.
Because like there's a structure, like everything has
Right.
kind of been mapped out now. Like artists can figure out how they're going to make money. Labels can figure out how to monetize things. And throughout the 70s, you just see it. I mean, the 80s is all exuberance, right? So you
Right.
see the 70s crescendo into that. I also just wanted to flag. So we talked a bit about the New York scene so far this season.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about CBGB's and also Max's Kansas City. And in 72, that's when Clive Davis, he meets with Aerosmith in the back room of Max's Kansas City to sign them to Columbia. And they stay with Columbia. They have a stint of 2 or 3 albums on Geffen in the 80s, but for the most part, from 1972 until this very day, they stay with Columbia the entire time. Yeah. We start hearing music from ABBA in their like final form begins then. And Diana Ross goes and makes her acting debut in Lady Sings the Blues that year, and wins an Oscar for her first appearance in a film. I mean,
Amazing.
We should probably do something about Diana Ross or something to that effect at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
'Cause she's a behemoth.
Yeah, there's so many artists. It's like we got to do this artist, we got to do that artist. But yeah, she deserves a spotlight for sure. We can definitely do that.
72, tough year for me. Tough. Like I'm looking at this, and I feel like remembering back to 71 last year, it wasn't that hard. There was a Fast and Away leader for me. I also felt like there wasn't as much that was just like viscerally important to me. But in going over this year, there's a couple things that like have a lot of importance to me.
Yes.
And this is a tough one to land on. How are you feeling about these options here?
This one, I agree. It was definitely a little bit more difficult than 71. You mentioned important records. I mean, we've got Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. Steely Dan, Can't Buy a Thrill. I mean, Curtis Mayfield with Superfly. Like, come on. There's so much going on this year.
Yeah.
Another
Also crazy because Bowie won your 71, and here is Ziggy Stardust, which is insane. Like,
right. And it's almost like,
prolific.
It was kind of, it was in the running, and I would like to think that it didn't affect my decision to not choose Bowie this year, because this is a very major Bowie album. This is like, boom. This is his like Rocket to the Moon album.
Yeah.
But there's just so much this year.
There is.
And go ahead.
Let me tell you a couple things on here that I bounced around and did my refresh, re-hit on. Nick Drake's Pink Moon.
Right.
I discovered Nick Drake at the time that I think people did, which was, there was a car commercial and I was in college. Yeah. I was in college and I bought all his albums, which there's like 3. And I fell head over heels. Like it just vibed with me and always has. Randy Newman's Sail Away. I love Randy Newman. Most people know him from the Pixar tunes, but
Right.
Sail Away is an incredible album. It is so, so good. There's so much tongue in cheek in everything that he writes, but it's so smart.
Totally.
And Stevie Wonder Talking Book, and that's a more recent thing for me. Again, like going back and discovering Motown and Motown adjacent stuff, and falling in love with that. So yeah, there's a couple on here. I'm not a big Rolling Stones guy. I feel like it'll happen someday, like in my 50s. I don't know, like something's gonna happen. I'll want to be Mick Jagger, but right now I don't. It's not my pick, but Big Star. We just talked about Big Star in our Super Drag conversation, right?
Yes, and. I definitely, I'm glad we're talking about them because I wanted to give them a nod. I don't think it's album of the year, but it's a very important album in terms of, looking forward and all of the, like we talked about in the Super Drag episode, all of the influence that they had. It's just, it's like, you can't even imagine, this band not existing. And what that would mean, like the ripple effect not being there, the whole butterfly effect thing, you kind of wonder what the landscape would have been like in the 80s and 90s if Big Star hadn't existed. And you could say that, you could truthfully say that about a lot of these artists on here. But yeah, Big Star that was huge. Not my number one pick, even though the name of the album is Number One Record, but that's clever.
All right, so my like three that I was bouncing around with were Nick Drake, Randy Newman, and Stevie Wonder. There's an amazing Aretha Franklin album that year. Neil Young's Harvest is iconic.
Huge.
That's a massive album. What were you grappling with in this category? What were your finalists, if you will? Do you have those?
Kind of, yeah. It again with David Bowie being such an iconic album of his. Neil Young, of course, Harvest has a lot of personal importance to me. If one record, if I had to save one record in my collection, it would be my copy of Harvest, which belonged. I don't know if I've talked about this on the show before, but I have two items from my aunt on my mom's side, who I was extremely close with as a kid because we lived near each other. So she was like the default babysitter, and she was like a second mom to me. She passed when I was 14.
Okay.
And so I have two things of that belong to her. One of them is I think it's a Yamaha. It's an old like folk guitar,
Nice.
acoustic guitar.
Cool.
The second is her copy of Neil Young's Harvest.
Wow.
With her name written on the front cover.
Oh my God.
So that is the most important, single record in my collection. And yeah, it's because of that personal connection and because of it's a memento of her as well. But I can't separate those things from how important the album itself is to me. Whether I'm listening to it on Apple Music or whether I have the record on, it doesn't matter. It's got the same impact. And then just kind of as a third, it was never really going to make it, but yeah, Big Star. I mean, I enjoyed listening to that and learning about them so much this past year, that it definitely crossed my mind. And maybe it was some mind games on their part with the name Number One Record. It just it plays some tricks in your brain, like, oh, this one's supposed to be number one. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
But ultimately, my number one is Neil Young. It's Harvest.
Is it? Okay. See, I don't have a connection to that album. It's one that I need to spend time with, and I never really have.
Yeah, I think without that personal connection being there, it would still be up there. It's hard for me to determine if it would still be my number one for this year without the personal connection. But I mean, the songs are so timeless on this album. You know, you've got Heart of Gold and Old Man, which are two of his most well-known songs. You've got The Needle and the Damage Done, which is like took on an even greater meaning later on, like in the 90s. And you saw a lot of bands covering it and things like that. It's one of those albums that on one hand, it's a time capsule, but also it's like, it's just as relevant today. So that, like, what more could you ask for? So I think it's a wonderful album. I was listening today and I couldn't stop listening to it. And it's definitely my pick for 72.
Yeah. And I think it also, you know, as we're trying to find the balance here between our own personal relationships with music, because music is inherently a very personal medium, and also trying to kind of encapsulate the era that we're talking about, the decade that we're talking about. Harvest is almost the perfect one to go with. I mean, I think it embodies a lot of the sentiment of that time and the sound and what people were looking for and hungry for. It's a super important album. That's a great pick. For me, so I didn't go with Nick Drake. Brighter Later is my Nick Drake album. Pink Moon's good, but there's something about the orchestration of Brighter Later that's always stuck with me. So that would be mine. And Randy Newman, I adore this album. The what am I trying to say here? The song of the title of the album, Sail Away. It's the self. Yeah. Is this, it opens with this amazing song about, how he imagines sarcastically, the pitch to African Americans to come to America and how great America would be, and it's so full of sarcasm, and it's so perfectly represented, and it goes on to be covered by Etta James and Ray Charles, and it gets embraced by like Gladys Knight and that whole world. And then you have Bobby Darin, who covers the song, but he covers it like it's a happy song. Like he missed the whole point. It falls
flat, right?
He misses the whole point of the racist undertones and the whole reason for writing the song, and he just treats it like,
he plays it straight.
It's kind of like Born in the USA, it's just like it.
Yeah, people kind of, using Born in the USA at political rallies.
Means different things. Yeah, it means something different.
Wow.
But I don't think that this embodies things, and it is an important album for me. But I think I have to give it to Talking Book by Stevie Wonder. And part of it is my personal affinity for this album and my kind of, again, recent renaissance discovery of this kind of music in the past few years. The synth, the funk in this album, and this is quintessential Stevie Wonder. This is Stevie Wonder. Like, he has become kind of unchained, one of the most prolific artists of the 60s into the 70s. This is his 15th album. He actually puts out 2 albums in 72 and another album in 73. This album wins his first Grammys, 3 Grammys off of this album.
Wow.
But he wins Album of the Year, dude, for his next album that comes out. That comes out like months later. So he doesn't even win. This one isn't the Grammy winner for Album of the Year. This wins. So Sunshine, You Are the Sunshine of My Life, and Superstition are some of his most well-known songs, and it was like this R&B force at the time, and it's so dynamic and it's so complex,
definitely,
and it's so uplifting. Stevie Wonder is infectious, and when you look at where his kind of trajectory goes, it gets a little funky because he puts out tons of records in the 60s, and then he comes into his own in the 70s, and he kind of breaks free of the control as a very young artist. He's not little Stevie anymore.
Right.
And he puts out a few albums in this throughout the 70s, and then like a handful in the 80s, and then I think that's kind of it, you know? So there's this beautiful crescendo into about 1980 of this guy's career, but this, for me, as I've taken my journey through his discography, like this is where Stevie is Stevie for me. This is the Stevie that I am most excited about, that I most celebrate and resonate with.
Yeah.
And so again, like trying to represent both the personal, but looking at the sign of the times. This was the era of Stevie Wonder. This was a big year and a big time for him. So 72, Stevie Wonder, Talking Book, Superstition's a jam, but
Yeah.
cover to cover, the whole thing's fantastic.
Yeah, I was blasting Superstition earlier today,
my
and
God.
you know, it was just like it's transportive. It just kind of brings you somewhere else, and that's a rare gift. That's rare in music, and that's kind of what you look for. I had really, I had a lot of fun putting that one on today.
Yeah.
So yeah, 1972, Liam's pick.
Feel good about it?
I feel great. This is off
good
to a
72.
great start.
Yeah.
So Liam's pick for 1972, Stevie Wonder, Talking Book. Adam's pick is Neil Young, Harvest.
That's right.
And there's 72 in a
Nice.
nutshell. And then 10 magical years later,
Fast forward.
I was born.
There you go. Congratulations. You were born. Ozzy bit the head off a bat and just like satanic
seems
panicked
fitting.
everything. Yeah. Yeah. We lost blues brother John Belushi. We first hear from Madonna. Her first single, Everybody Comes Out. Pink Floyd debuts their film adaptation of The Wall, kind of blurring the lines between things as a bunch of bands had been doing at the time. And Cats. My sister was very into Cats, like the Broadway show. I'm
Yeah.
not a musical guy, but
Me either.
I've seen it. It's cool. Yeah, I dig it. I didn't see the movie, but one of the longest running shows on Broadway kicks off in 82 and runs through the year 2000. 18-year run.
Wow.
Starting then. So that's quite the accomplishment for
run.
a bunch of cats. Yeah.
Interesting
How was
year
80
for music.
Yeah. And I feel the same way. Like, I had an easier time with 82. There's a few personal texture points here, but less than I thought. Like 80s I went back to the 80s when I had my like own musical discoveries.
Right.
And so I expected more of 82, and there's just not as much that hits like I thought it would. What about you?
Yeah, it's just kind of an interesting microcosm of kind of what was going on in the world at the time, because you see a lot of extremes, you see a lot of splintering, and, you know, artists really digging into their thing and, you know, taking it as far as it'll go.
Yeah.
You see a lot of kind of new sounds and new recording techniques being used. We've kind of entered into the digital age at this point. So you start to hear some drum machines and things like that. So we're starting to include some new technology into the mix here, and that changes things up quite a bit. And then on the other side, you've got, you know, new genres of music entering the picture. You know, you've got Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five with The Message. And you've got Bad Brains' self-titled album, which is just extreme punk music.
Yeah.
You've got a kind of a new subgenre, you know, with The Cure coming in. So you've got Van Halen. I mean, there's so much going on, but it's all very, none of these artists sound anything like each other. And of course you've got Michael Jackson, which is a cultural phenomenon at this point.
Yeah, it feels like 82 embodies such a snapshot of the confusion of what music was at that point. You had a lot of like post-disco funk influenced, but you had the punk coming out of the UK and out of New York, obviously. You had your start of the big stadium bombastic rock bands. It's such an odd crossroads, but very few things that personally resonated with me. Strangely, like I can recognize how important a lot of this is for where music goes from here, but
the personal connection isn't quite there.
Yeah, like Springsteen's Nebraska. I mean, we come back to Springsteen a bunch, but like I want to love this album so much. It's supposed to be the album I love, and it's not. It just isn't. It just doesn't do it, It's the
only Bruce Springsteen album that does anything for me, but it's certainly not album of the year.
No.
It deserves a mention.
Yeah.
Is there anything that at least stood out to you to get the ball rolling for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, so there's one on here where if it was just strictly what had the most impact on the music that was formative to me personally, Liam, it's probably Milo Goes to College by Descendants.
There you go.
It is this like paradigm shift in taking what punk was from the Ramones and Television and these bands that are kind of redefining punk, and it's a bunch of bratty kids who are complaining about their parents, and it's the reason why Blink-182 exists. It's the reason why Rise Against, and I mean Dave Grohl has said like it's one of his most important albums of his like formative early years, like Taking Back Sunday, all of my pop punk emo roots all kind of start from this place. And Bill Stevenson, who's one of the songwriters and the drummer of the band, goes on to be a prolific producer for those bands, like because this band goes through these iterations where they split up, they reform, they have a side project called All, and they go off and they do their own individual things, and Bill goes and basically helps create the fabric of pop punk, like between the work he did with Black Flag, the work he did with All, and then all the production credits. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, I mean, I look, there's so much good and interesting stuff on here. Like I really like Duran Duran's Rio, but dude, can anything beat Thriller? I mean, like, is that like, are we doing our quote unquote job? I know this isn't a job, but like Thriller is one of the greatest albums of all time for a reason. I mean, that track listing, it looks like his greatest hits, and it's not. It's just everything's good. It's just insane. So, sorry, tip in the hand, but I looked at this and I'm like, I don't think I have to do that much soul searching, Like, Thriller is Thriller, dude. It's Thriller. The again, I can't think of the word. I'm going to think of it afterwards, but the title track, there it is, right?
Title track
is the last single of 7 singles released from this. Like everybody remembers Thriller. Everybody remembers Thriller, but like Human Nature and Beat It and Billie Jean and The Girl Is Mine featuring Paul freaking McCartney and Eddie Vedder is on Beat It. I mean, it's insane. It's insane. So I can't argue for anything else. Like Thriller is Thriller. It's Thriller.
You threw me off there for a second. Eddie Van Halen.
Eddie Van Halen. Yeah.
Sorry. Just
I
wanted
said
to,
Eddie Vedder.
you said Eddie Vedder, and my brain, like, I did a little.
That would have
twitch.
been awesome, by the way.
That would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Eddie Van Halen. Sorry.
So no, but you're totally right. You're 100% right.
Yeah.
On all counts. And I'm glad that you picked Thriller so that I didn't have to.
Oh my God.
Well, I'm just glad that one of us did. And
Do it.
I mean, it was in the running. I have the album.
Sure.
It's-
Dude, you talk about an album that comes with your
Yeah,
turntable.
it comes with every turntable that you buy, and there's not even much else to say about it that hasn't already been said.
Yeah, they give it to you at Urban Outfitters. That's
it's
just
a-
like when you walk in there, you get Thriller.
It's sort of like talking about the Beatles. It's kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
we get it. It's
Yeah.
but and as much as I love Duran Duran and deserves a mention, and as much as I love The Clash,
Yeah.
this is not The Clash's best album.
Right.
As much as I like Kate Bush, this is not Kate Bush's best album this year with The
Right.
Dreaming. Mission to Burma deserves a mention, I think, because the doing the kind of music that they were doing in 1982 is ridiculous. You wouldn't think, when the first time I heard Verses, I thought it was from the 90s. Like, it's basically grunge in 1982. It's insane.
Yeah.
But I am giving 1982 to the artist formerly known as Prince. At the time known as
it's
Prince,
a good
of
call.
course.
Yeah, he was Prince.
1999 is the name of the
Yeah.
album.
Yep.
Thriller was great. Thriller's iconic. It's among, if not the best-selling album of all time. Prince took it a step further and just kind of catapulted pop and R&B into the future.
Yeah.
And it's fitting that it's called 1999 because he was probably about 20 years ahead of the pack
Yeah,
when
that's
it
a great
came
point.
to music.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing what he was able to do. I mean, you look at obviously the title track 1999, Little Red Corvette, Delirious, Automatic, Let's Pretend We're Married. This album also sort of reads like a greatest hits for him. It's partially. And I think in the long run, 1999 was probably the more influential album. I think there's an argument for that, which I won't
I think so.
take the time to make here
No,
because we have a
but
lot
I
more
can
to
see
get
that.
to.
Yeah, I could see that.
But that has to be my pick
Yeah.
for 1982.
I mean, those are good representations of that time again. I mean, if it's
For sure.
not Thriller, it's 1999.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm glad.
I mean, there's going to be some Duran Duran fans that are pretty pissed, but that's okay.
I could have seen myself, I'll put it this way. I could have seen myself going Duran Duran if 1999 didn't come out that year.
Yeah.
If it had come out, I don't know, a year later or a year before, I could definitely have seen myself going Duran Duran. But then at the same time, Duran Duran over Michael Jackson, though,
Yeah.
that's a tough sell.
You can't.
I don't think Prince over Michael Jackson is a tough sell. I think Duran Duran over Michael Jackson is a tough sell, as much as I would rather listen to Duran Duran.
Yeah.
Or
I also
or-
think both of those artists would agree with you.
Probably.
Yeah. They'd be like, no, you take it. No, you take it. Yeah, you take it. Yeah.
Exactly right. That's a pretty good. That's a pretty good lineup for 1982, I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's solid.
Awesome.
So then I was born in 84.
Hey.
And I come rocking into 92.
90s.
Yeah, Nevermind and
Decade of
grunge.
angst.
Yeah. So we have Nevermind comes out last year.
Yep.
We didn't pick that for anything, did we? We talked about it a bunch, but
Probably a
I don't think that maybe was it?
I don't know.
I think that I wouldn't have picked it for anything. What was your number one?
I don't know.
My
I feel
Bloody
like
Valentine. I think you talked about it and you were pretty torn. But
probably.
I also don't know if Nevermind's your Nirvana album, I don't
It's
know.
not. I talked about
Yeah.
that for sure. In Utero is my Nirvana album,
Yeah.
which I think is
Yeah.
better in every sense, every aspect.
Yeah. You have Natalie Cole, her duet with her father, Unforgettable, just sweeps the Grammys that year. Album, song, record of the year. November Rain, I loved that song. I'm not a huge Guns N' Roses guy, but I really like November Rain. Breaks the record for the longest single, just shy of 9 minutes, 8 minutes, 57 seconds. Long song. We have the release and the development of the MP3. All the chaos begins.
Oh, yes.
And speaking of chaos, you have Sinead O'Connor going on SNL and ripping up a photo of the Pope, which was a whole thing.
Yeah, and we basically never hear from her again after that.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah.
Unless you were already a fan.
Yeah. And then Whitney Houston just releases one of the greatest selling albums of all time. We talked about The Bodyguard. Yeah. Acting debut, and releases the Bodyguard soundtrack, 45 million copies worldwide. So that is a contender in this ultimately. Like, it's not something that means anything to me, but it is, and if we're talking about like big albums of the time, huge. Like that is one that needs to be mentioned within this conversation. What are your thoughts on the 92 lineup here?
There's a lot here. I mean, so you've got the debut Rage Against the Machine self-titled album, which, I mean, you could argue things came before this, but even if there were some rap rock roots that came, which clearly there are, we go back to Rick Rubin and getting Run DMC and Aerosmith together, and the Beastie Boys and all that. But this first Rage Against the Machine album absolutely just jump started the 90s rap rock and new metal thing. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, it was the first. It was a political album for a new generation. Every generation has their like political anthem albums, and this I feel like was kind of the first one for like the 90s kids.
Yeah,
got a lot of people fired up and listening and interested in politics and the what was going on in the world and in the country. So it's important in that aspect for sure. REM, Automatic for the People, arguably one of their most well-known albums, huge hits on that album. This was a big year for me for Sonic Youth, probably my favorite Sonic Youth album with Dirty. You've got Dr. Dre's The Chronic, which is like, that kickstarts a lot. I mean, I know we had NWA, but in the same as we had with Rage Against the Machine, I think The Chronic really kind of, I'll say it this way, it kind of brings the gangster rap genre to the masses. It brings it to the mainstream.
Yeah, it was where you started. It was like if you were too scared to go straight out of Compton, The Chronic was one that every kid could pick up.
It was somehow the safer pick.
Yeah, right? It's kind of crazy.
Despite the pot leaf on the front, it was like it was the safer pick between those two for a suburban white kid anyway. And we'll get to it later, but we had a nice little discussion in the Retro Logic, Retro Groove kind of Discord sub community leading up to this. And there was a lot of love for The Chronic. Like that was top of a lot of people's. And I'm sorry,
lists.
I misspoke. The Chronic this is not the Chronic that has the pot leaf on the cover. That was the next one.
It was The Chronic 2001.
Yes. Yeah. So I misspoke on that one. But still the safer pick.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I ultimately
I was gonna say you got Check Your Head by Beastie Boys too, right?
Yes.
Like great album. Yeah.
Yes. And that's exactly where I was going.
Okay.
Sir.
Okay.
And I did get your Christmas card.
Nice.
Which I appreciated very much.
Yeah.
For those that don't know what I'm talking about, Liam and his family did an amazing
recreated it.
recreation of the cover of Beastie Boys Check Your Head for their Christmas card this year.
Yeah, we did Check Your List.
Check your list.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
And for me, looking at all these and like I feel like the 90s was a year of like, if 80s was the year of splintering and extremes, I feel like 90s was the year of, oh, okay, let's take all these extremes and see how we can just like put them all into a melting pot, mesh stuff together, get sad and sing about it.
Yeah.
So,
you going Beasties?
I'm going Beasties.
A good call.
Lots
really
of mishmash going on this album. It's a little bit more of a somber tone for a Beastie Boys record. I think they kind of finally start to, number one, they start showing their talent as instrumentalists. They still obviously are using a lot of samples, but they're not as sample heavy as they were with, Paul's Boutique and the, triple digit number of samples going on.
Yeah.
They kind of get back to their roots a little bit as well. And it's just a really excellent, all encompassing, well-rounded, time capsule of the era, but of what the Beastie Boys were capable of and who they were. And I love a lot of these other albums from this year, but I think that album kicking off the early 90s is so fitting, and it's so listenable even to this day, with just some of the most iconic tracks from the boys. And I love it. I can't, it really couldn't have been any other album on this list for me, or anything that came out that year. And there's some great albums for this year. But that's it for me. Like, honestly, there's not even much more to say about it. As far as I'm concerned, we did the Beastie Boys, expose finally, in episode 1 of this season. And I think that episode speaks for itself. I'm going Beastie Boys all the way on this one for sure.
Nice. So this Rage album wasn't my Rage album. I wasn't listening to music at this point. And when I went back from Battle of Los Angeles and Evil Empire to this, I recognized, and fell in love with some of the songs on it, but Battle of Los Angeles will always be my Rage album. I think it's my entry point, and it's I'd make the argument that it's where they kind of, the idea of that band fully synergized and culminated. Like, it's the perfect crescendo, whereas this album is just raw. This album
it's pretty raw.
Yeah, this album is like the explosive mission statement of what Battle of Los Angeles then becomes. But I did weigh that. The Chronic, so for me, hip hop, I was not one of those suburban kids that grabbed this. Again, just a little before my time. I was a Wu-Tang, Busta Rhymes, Outkast kid, and I have a lot of appreciation for Dr. Dre, but this album, I don't have a personal connection to it, but I recognize its importance, and it definitely deserves to be talked about here. And the other mention that I'll broadly make is that there is a lot of hard rock stuff that came out this year. For me, Vulgar Display of Power, like,
that was big.
If there's another band that isn't Metallica that is in that palatable metal space that I like listening to, it's Pantera. I like the Megadeth album that came out this year. I'm not a Stone Temple Pilots fan. I'm not an Alice in Chains fan. But there's a lot of important hard rock, like the metal and hard rock is kind of coming into its own in a big way at this point, for sure. Because it's having rampant commercial success.
Yeah. But I feel like a lot of these, like with Stone Temple Pilots is a good example, even somewhat with Alice in Chains. Like I feel like, and you mentioned it with Rage as well, but it's a lot of debuts from some bands that would go on to do some really, really amazing stuff.
Exactly.
But I don't feel like their 92 albums are their best work.
Yeah, I agree. I
Even if they're
definitely
great,
agree.
even if they're
Yeah.
great, but it's
Yeah.
not album of the year material, in my
Yeah.
opinion. As much as I fell in love with Stone Temple Pilots' core and basically learned to play guitar listening to this album, it wasn't even really something I considered in the running
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, I mean the Pantera album and the Megadeth album, but this Pantera album is akin to the Battle of Los Angeles in that same trajectory. Like this is their like fifth or sixth album, and it's really when they're coming into their own.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just it winds up. I think it's one of the most influential hard rock albums of that era.
Yeah.
Super important metal album. But I am gonna have to go Automatic for the People.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Had a feeling.
yeah, I love REM. Again, it's something that I touched on here and there throughout my sort of musical education. You know, I bought some of their more contemporary albums as they were released in high school. Like I liked them in high school, which is weird.
No, I liked them in high school quite a bit.
Yeah. There's something kind of emo about that though, dude. Like, cause these bands were putting out, like these guys were older, you know, like
Yeah.
they were a little bit older. This is, their ninth album or something like that at that point. You know, I was listening
lost
to a
count
lot
at
of
this point.
yeah, exactly. Like I was listening to a lot of newer music, and then something about this band. I was buying their 11th album. Like that's
Yeah.
weird.
I was the same way. I was listening to Automatic for the People and Monster and bought New Adventures in Hi-Fi. Like I was super into REM during the
Yeah.
90s. Like it was
There's
like,
something really special about that band. There's a sincerity to their music. Like I don't know if I could properly describe what it is about how they write and perform and curate their music, but they're kind of timeless to me.
Oh, for sure.
And this album, amongst above all others, I think is the most like Night Swimming and Drive. Like some of these songs, they feel fresh 30
Yes.
years later.
Agree.
It's pretty crazy. I find myself still just listening to this album. It's one of those of the time that if I'm again flipping through my CD wallet, I see it and I'm like, yeah, I'll throw that on. You know,
For
that's
sure.
like, it's like an easy, delicious thing to experience again. Everybody Hurts played out a bit, you know, like
a little bit. It got a little overplayed.
yeah, but I've come back to it. You know, it was like losing my religion, where I'm like, you know, I've heard this a million times, but then when you don't hear it for a few years and you come back and you're like, oh wait, this is a good song.
Yeah,
I think it's a
really
pretty
good song. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for VH1, probably would have never gotten sick of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
A lot of REM on that VH1.
Yeah. So that was that had to be my 92 pick.
Beautiful pick. Yes. And 92, got Liam with Automatic for the People, REM, and you've got me with Beastie Boys, Check Your Head. And
Yep.
there was a part of me that thought we might have a match on this one.
I considered it.
That
I
we
definitely
might-
considered it. Yep.
We might have had the match. The Christmas card probably is what did it. Is
Yeah.
what pushed me over the edge.
Yeah.
But that was awesome. Thank you for that again.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So Y2K happens. Airplanes fall out of the sky.
Yeah.
The banks all delete everyone's money. No, wait. No, that didn't actually happen.
That's right. Yeah. But Britney Spears does wind up becoming the world's most powerful celebrity. So like
There we
when
go.
you look at today and you worry about like Kardashians and Elon Musk and all that, like
No,
we've been there,
been there,
guys.
done that.
We've been there for a while. Don't worry about it. Napster gets shut down for the first time. So that was actually kind of quick. Like we moved on to Kazaa and LimeWire and we found a million other things, you know?
They're like cockroaches.
Yeah, and we got our first Bonnaroo. Coachella had just kicked up, although it was still finding its format. But you really start to see the genesis of these massive destination festivals. You know, some of them had toured in the 90s. Lollapalooza did some touring. It was a roving thing. The Warped Tour would go on to do that for a while. But but Coachella, Bonnaroo, yeah, I had a few of these. I think Farm Aid had started a couple years before that. So you wound up having a bunch of big festivals that start to launch. And so 2002, I don't know about where you were at. I was graduating from high school. I was going away to college. Music was like at the peak of my identity in many ways. Like I wasn't a movie kid. We've established that, you know, like music was, I went to school for music basically. Like this was a huge thing for me. And this is the point where I stop shopping at the wall and I start shopping at Tower Records, you know, like I'm all in. I'm buying CD singles from Japan at this point.
Yeah, there you go.
45s and stuff. What about you? What's 2002? Are you at Newbury at this point?
So 2002 is weird, and there's a lot going on. You know, we had the terrorist attacks on 9/11 just the year prior. I had basically dropped out of college. I was going to college for recording arts, and I got so jaded by the industry of it. You know, I went to college as a bright-eyed kid who just I had no like delusions of grandeur that I was going to be a rock star or anything. I just wanted to make music. I just wanted to make a living making music, and to learn the inside of the industry from industry insiders and like see how it really works, you know, see behind the curtain. It was just like, it was kind of a shock. And so, over the course of that prior year, you know, early 2001 through mid 2002, I had dropped out of college, had to rediscover like who I was as a person, who I was as a music fan, who I was as a musician. 9/11 happens. I was working at Newbury Comics that morning of 9/11.
Oh, wow.
Like, for those that don't know, Newbury Comics is comic book / record store, one of the more well-known and prolific record stores in the Northeast. I changed my life I moved to Texas in 2002.
Oh, wow. So this is a big time.
Yeah, big year for me. This was a difficult year for me because there was so much going on. There's so much music, so much interesting stuff happening in music. I remember 2001 being a particularly hard year for me to pick, last year as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot this year. There's a new Super Drag album that comes out. It's a little different. It's a little bit disjointed, but we're all a little bit thrown off. You know, the country is in a weird place 3 to 6 months after 9/11. No one really knows what's next, other than war. You've got Interpol, which is kind of a new sound, mixing some kind of old sound into it. You get some very new wave influence being interjected into indie rock, which was kind of a new thing for this era. You've got a really amazing Spoon album with Kill the Moonlight that starts to kind of pare down rock and roll to its most basic elements, and it's still a rock album, but it's so like interestingly quiet in a way, and sort of challenges and changed what I thought a rock and roll album could be.
Yeah.
You've got RJD2, which is a huge album for me, with Dead Ringer, which a lot of people are like, they look at it as this is what we hoped DJ Shadow would continue to go on to do. This is part of my adventures in, you know, turntablism and really, really, really early sampling. I think I bought my first sampler in 2001. I bought this Akai S20 sampler off of eBay, and I had no idea how to use it. And I was just like taking bits of records and trying to figure out how to edit it and stuff like that. So this is a very, very interesting and formative time for me.
That's so awesome, though.
Yeah,
Oh my God. I can't believe I didn't know you did that. That's awesome.
It's so much. Yeah, there's a lot at this point in my life. I was 19 and 20, didn't know, still trying to figure out who I was. But you're just getting out of high school and going off to college. So what does your 2002 look like musically?
Yeah, it's amazing to hear like this deep personal connection with a lot of the music that you're talking about. I have that here, albeit it's a little more predictable. I think I'm still not super deep in my like. I'm not in the liner notes yet, I guess I'll say, So I remember the big poster in Tower Records for A Rush of Blood to the Head by Coldplay.
Yep.
And I remember hearing some of those songs and being like, this is a really good band. And then they go on to be like the biggest band in the world.
Right.
And I go back to that album and it is still very good. I think that Parachutes and X and Y actually have some of my favorite songs. And even like Viva La Vida. But cover to cover, there's something very special. I spent a lot of time with Rush of Blood to the Head. I had my first iPod at this point, and there was a lot of walking. I was in Manhattan, and so it was a lot of headphone walking at that time. So it was a lot of Coldplay in my ears. I had my first turntable.
Nice.
I inherited the same one that I'm talking about
that
now.
you're still using until now.
It's going across the finish line. And I remember buying Nora Jones's Come Away With Me. Like I remember.
Oh, nice.
When she first came out, I don't know why it was a pop hit, right? Like it was such a big moment when we first heard Nora Jones. And in college, my jazz major roommate he introduced me to Billie Holiday, and we listened to a lot of Ella and Billie. As you do. Yeah, but like then I found my own, like he moved out and I found Nora and I was like, oh, this is my lady. Like she's going to be what plays on the turntable as I lay in bed and wonder about my life.
Yeah.
There's something gorgeous about that album. And then like, again, like Rage was important to me. I wasn't really a Cornell fan, per se, but when you first heard Audio Slave, like first of all, that band doesn't even seem like it should exist.
Right.
Like
Totally.
we hadn't had that much supergroup exposure at that point of our own era.
Yeah.
And then to have that happen, you're like, how is this? What is this? This is insane.
Audio Slave was basically the
Soundgarden
super group of our generation.
yeah. And it's so good. That album is so good. But ultimately, I think I go with the Roots Phrenology.
Wow.
Which, it's interesting for me because there's a run of Things Fall Apart, Phrenology, and Tipping Point that and Game Theory even too. Like those albums all along there, I still love. I still listen to a bunch. And Phrenology is it's really all over the place. Like I remember I was exposed to it by The Seed, which isn't even their song. It's a Cody Chestnut song that he goes on and they basically re-record with him. But I remember picking that up because I was like, man, this MC, like Black Thought, is so good. Like I was just like, who is this guy? Because I at that point I had an understanding and an appreciation for hip hop, but I hadn't heard anything like this. Like I didn't know what this kind of hip hop was.
Exactly.
And I don't think anybody did. I didn't know who Talib Kweli was at that point, or Mos Def or any of those artists. And I remember getting this album, and it's one of those things we've talked about before where I put it on and it's nothing like the song that I bought it for.
Right, of course.
And the first couple times it's like Hello Nasty, where I'm like, what is
going on? Yeah.
This is a punk song, and then there's an R&B song with Nelly Furtado, and now like it's all over the place. But over the years, like I'll admit that in the moment I didn't appreciate it as much, and I gravitated towards the tipping point more so. I feel like that was more pop oriented, but the sort of like jazz rap and experimental aspect of phrenology has I don't know, stood the test of time, I guess. Like for me, I look back at that and I'm like, it was almost like an awakening. It was something that it was eye-opening to me on like what I thought. I thought hip hop was gangsters and fisheye lenses and, whatnot. And then there's these guys and there's soul, and there's jazz. And like, then I go on to find A Tribe Called Quest and I absolutely fall in love, so because of how it represents what hip hop was becoming, that sort of like neo soul hip hop of the time, and also just my own kind of personal trajectory with that. Like I was experimenting and I was starting to come awake. I go from like the commercial palatability of Coldplay and Norah Jones that I just talked about to this wildly experimental hip hop album. And I'm like, a couple years later, it comes back to me. So I'm going to go with Phrenology by The Roots.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
Really, really cool.
So where are you at? Because this is a tough one.
Yeah. And this was the hardest one for me this year, for sure.
Yeah, I looked at this lineup and I'm like, this is like an Adam year.
So much here. And, you've got the Flaming Lips, you've got a Beck album, but not the
Good
best
Beck
Flaming Lips album, and not the best Beck album. You've got Nas with God's Son, you've got Jay-Z with the Blueprint 2. You've got Eminem with the Eminem Show. None of their best albums, though.
Yeah, the Eminem Show was kind of the end of that run, because then he goes on to Encore, and the wheels fall off a little bit for a little while. The Eminem Show was that last hurrah of the Eminem that broke out, but definitely not his strongest album.
Right. And there's a lot of those here. I mean, the Foo Fighters had One by One. It's a great record, not their best record. I would say not even close to their best record.
Yeah.
For me, it bounced around. Obviously, there's Spoon, fantastic album. Not album of the year for me, however, as much as I love Spoon. Interpol was in the running there, but when I put this album on, I was instantly transported back 20 years, and I think it's so powerful. It's such powerful music and so emotional. And maybe it's just a personal connection that I have with it. But I was like, after all this time and however many times I listened to it, I was still floored by this album. And the album is Source Tags and Codes by And You Will Know Us by The Trail of Dead.
Wow.
This,
okay.
if you
didn't see that coming.
I certainly didn't see The Roots coming either. So
yeah, sure.
2002 is a year of big changes and big surprises.
Yeah.
This album is, this is a band from Austin, Texas. They have a weird name. It's the name of the band is ... And You Will Know Us by The Trail of Dead. So you
end up calling them Trail of Dead.
Pretty much.
Right? Yeah.
And so, that kind of gets your attention. And then it starts with like this piano interlude, and it's very beautiful. And that piano interlude gives way to some of the most raw and intense guitar, and not full on screaming, but like Kurt Cobain style, like throat rattling singing. Like he's hitting notes, but he is screaming at the absolute top of his lungs while he's hitting these notes. And it goes through a few different cadences where you've got, straight up mid-tempo rock songs, some faster, more sort of punk-esque style songs, and some slower songs, but all with the same like high gain guitars and just like someone screaming out of their lungs with so much emotion and soul and purpose behind what they're saying. And it might have just hit me at the right time in my life, and it might have, not hit quite the same if I heard it at a different time in my life. But going back and listening to it today, I couldn't stop listening to it, and it brought me right back to 2002. And this is one that I go back to probably a couple times a year. And it'll be the only album I listen to for maybe a week. And it always brings me right back. And it's sort of, for me at least, opens up the door to that kind of next chapter of time, going into out of the prior century and into the 2010s. And, it means a lot to me, and this one's probably more of a personal connection thing, but that's my pick.
Because they have a substantial body of work, I think, right? At least a dozen albums.
They put out a lot of albums after that. None of them really, the newer one is actually probably my second favorite after this. Oh, okay. Surprisingly, they put a new one out, recently, and it's quite good. It's very listenable, and it's still got a lot of the same feel to it. I think Britt Daniel features on it, actually. Both Austin, Texas bands. But yeah, none of their albums after that really ended up hitting for me. But I have it on vinyl. It's one of my favorite albums of all time, a very important album to me. And I think more people should know about it. I think people should give it a front to back listen and give it a chance. And I think they'll be surprised. It's definitely one of those where you kind of flow through the whole album.
And I'd be remiss in being myself. I have to be myself. If I let 2002 go by without just flagging the sort of paradigm shift that the Mountain Goats go through at this point, because just like the Stevie Wonder situation, like Darnell had been so prolific, and he'd been releasing albums. I think it was 6 albums on these. Like kept recording them and releasing them on like a boombox, just like a little boombox like any of us would have had with a microphone. And he puts out All Hail West Texas, which is like the seminal culmination of that era of the Mountain Goats. And then a few months later puts out Tallahassee, which is, it's put out on 4AD, which is a big label, and is a complete shift. Like, it's a properly studio orchestrated. I mean, it's not, the arrangements aren't that intricate, we're not at that point. We're not at Get Lonely level of Mountain Goats yet. That comes a few years later, but 2002 is that moment that I would go back to appreciate as you kind of dig through the tapes of what that band was. And then this pivot point of this is the new start of the higher quality recording and other instrumentalists. It's not just John, it's becoming a band. It's becoming properly recorded. He's fleshing out these ideas. So I have to indulge for a moment.
Of course.
I see you, Texas Trey, Mountain Goats. It's a big year for Mountain Goats fans, for sure.
Awesome.
Putting a ribbon on that, I think we jump ahead to 2012. Where I think both you and I have come into our own in many ways of our musical tastes and our finding an appreciation for a diversity of sounds, even more so. And I think that this list that I'm looking at here represents that really nicely. I didn't realize that Frank Ocean album came out in 2012. That feels like a very long time ago. Channel Orange, wow. Like Kendrick, it feels like so long between some of his albums that it makes sense that Kendrick album came out then.
Right.
But yeah, Frank Ocean, wow.
Crazy.
Yeah. So we talked about Adele last year.
Mm-hmm.
I had her for my 2011, and that spills over into this year. First female artist to have 3 singles in the top 10 at the same time. First female artist to have 2 albums simultaneously in the top 5 and 2 singles in the top 5 all at the same time. I mean, it was massive. Like 21 came out, everyone went back to 19, and everybody freaked out. I mean, Adele Mania really hit its fever pitch in 2012, but started the year before. And then we would go on to lose a lot of people.
Yeah.
We lost Whitney, we lost Etta James, we lost Donna Summer, we lost your boy MCA. And again, like it's just, there's so many important people in the industry at this point. We have this incredible quilt, this like fabric of recorded and released music, and it's the way of things. But yeah, some really, really great albums this year. I don't know how was this list for you?
This was a weird one. So this was a time in my life. I was a father for the first time. I was deep into like my career at this point, and like I was a new homeowner and like trying to deal with all of the ins and outs of that. So like, I don't know that I necessarily want to say music was put on the back burner, but it was just a very different relationship with music at this point.
Interesting. Okay.
And there are a number of these that stick out. Tame Impala with Lonerism was very big. And maybe for me, that was kind of, you listen to that album and it's like, some of these songs sound more like the Beatles than the Beatles do. It's it's one of those, that Alabama Shakes album with Boys and Girls. That was a huge kind of shift. I remember kind of hearing about them, but then like, I think what solidified it was seeing them do a live performance on SNL, I think it was. And it was like, wow, okay, this is new and interesting and exciting. Now I didn't listen to them at the time, but we get those iconic LP and Killer Mike albums.
It's the seeds of Run the Jewels.
Exactly.
Basically.
So that's really exciting to look back and see, but they certainly weren't on my radar then. I didn't go back and start listening to and enjoying these albums until, post RTJ takeover.
Yeah. Rap music's very good.
So I ultimately ended up going with Fiona Apple for 2012.
Cool. Nice one.
You mentioned Norah Jones being that album that you put on as you're falling asleep and contemplating life and almost like letting her serenade you to sleep. Yeah. So for me, that was the first Fiona Apple record.
And that'll get in your head, dude.
Yeah, a little bit.
Jeez.
Maybe that's telling. I don't know. But I think as a Fiona Apple fan, that this album is her best work. Idler Wheel is, it's just, it kind of takes your breath away. It's one of those albums it can be sort of hard to listen to if you're not kind of in that headspace of, okay, I need to hear a woman who's been wronged throughout her life, poetically and liltingly yell at me, and I'm going to enjoy every second of it.
Amazing.
It's a fantastic album, listenable front to end. start to finish. And it's kind of hard for me to put it into words. I could not stop listening to this album when I put it on this past week. It just kept kind of haunting me and reminding me of a lot of things about my own life, and sending me various places in the forgotten halls of my memory.
Yeah.
And none of these other albums from this year, as good as a lot of them are, I listened to a lot of Alt J. That album is excellent. It's kind of our debut to them, and I think that deserves a mention. Taylor Swift with Red. I'm not personally a fan of her music, but I think this is a huge year for Taylor Swift.
An important one, yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't stop coming back to Fiona Apple on this one, and I like her other albums, but the debut and this one are like almost neck and neck for me. Very, very different albums, but very much the same person. And to see the growth, and, she has this philosophy where it's like, if once you create something, you should feel entirely drained and have nothing left inside of you. And when you listen to her songs, you can like tell, she's every like cell in her body is being drained and to create this record. So that's a major feat. And the new album really, her more recent album didn't really hit with me, kind of at all, which was kind of sad because it was very long awaited, and it didn't hit. And so this is kind of the ultimate Fiona Apple experience for me.
Yeah, I think when you're dealing with an artist like her, she is just going to make what she makes.
Yep.
And she's not thinking about the commercial viability, or
Absolutely.
anything to that effect. Like, that's bound to happen where you and an artist are going to be at different points, and maybe that music will speak to you at a different time, or maybe it never will.
It could very well. So
I need to go back to this album because aside from Criminal, everybody heard Criminal, but I fell in love with Extraordinary Machine, which was mid 2000s. And I remember going to this album and being like, I don't know what I'm listening to.
They're very different.
Yeah. And so, but I've never gone back to it, so I probably should. It's been cited as a very important album, and also there's a little bit of a trend here. Not to say that there hasn't been in years past, but I'll call attention again that I think through now and into the future, it seems without end that you have some extraordinarily powerful women carrying the torch of progressive music in their pop spaces, their subsequent pop spaces, blues, country, hard rock, whatever.
Yeah.
And that is apparent here, like Fiona Apple and Taylor Swift and Brittany Howard and Lana Del Rey.
Yep.
Like there's so much here that I think this is like one of those times where you see the shift, and it's like they're kind of running stuff. Yeah, they're the ones who are pushing the envelope of what pop music is. And so it makes it super hard for me too.
It's a tough year.
I had one in mind for this, and then I pivoted like yesterday. So I'm re-looking at this list right now. Taylor Swift Red is a big one. Everybody looks at 1989 as her pop breakthrough coming of age, but Red is when she starts working with Max Martin, Butch Walker, Dan Wilson of Semisonic. Like, this is her pop breakthrough, and I think it establishes her beyond the like pop country crossover as just Taylor. Like, you can just say Taylor, and this is when it starts up again.
Yeah.
So incredibly important album. Semi-personal for me. Like I remember listening to it a bunch. It could be album of the year for me. I looked at Taylor's now friend, Jack Antonoff. They put out that Fun album, Some Nights, massive hits. And again, like channeling Queen in this really special way that like I hadn't heard on MTV or on the radio in a while. Like Some Nights cover to cover is fantastic. And we had a little conversation in the Discord about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I want more Fun. You know, like there was talk of like, man, I wish that there had been another album. And I feel like this was that band. Like this embodies what that band was. I don't know how familiar you are with Japan Droids.
A little bit.
Celebration Rock was a really big album, and it was going to be my choice for this. It's kind of where I had landed. It's this just uplifting, explosive punk garage album, but it's instantly accessible.
Yes.
And it resonated at this point in my life for me. Like it ticked every box.
Mm-hmm.
But when I look back over the year, if I'm being honest with myself, and if I'm being honest with what I think was going on in music at the time, it's either Taylor or it's my ultimate pick, which is Born to Die by Lana Del Rey.
Oh, okay.
So Born to Die is a controversial album. She's a controversial artist. There's a lot of talk about like how sincere she actually is because she's kind of a persona.
Mm-hmm.
I would posit rather that most artists that we talk about are also that. She's just laying it on the line and just being like, this is the part of me that I'm going to showcase.
Right. She even did that whole bit on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. She was an alcoholic at 13, you know, like, and like had to go away to school and wrote these songs about that. So there's context to this. She's not just, you know, it's not like she watched Splendor in the Grass and decided to like create somebody.
Right.
She just, this is her vessel for how she communicates her stuff. This album is, I think it's slightly misunderstood. The SNL performance was flawed. I think most bands sound terrible on SNL, so there's that to start with.
Well, right.
But that was her exposure to everybody. Like this was her launch.
Mm-hmm.
And Video Games had come out and was a viral hit, and it was this swimmy ballad, right? And it was like it just vibed with everybody. And she went on there and performed it, and it just kind of fell flat because you have SNL, which is lots of laughs and jokes and energy, and then a ballad. And then she came back out and did basically another ballad. Like, if you look at it on paper, she did the singles, right? Like, this is what they looked at her and they were like,
these are the popular songs. Do the popular ones.
She's an old. Well, they were framing her. The label was trying to frame her as the modern day old timey crooner. And I would say, and this is just me, I would say Adele has something to do with that, because I think that Interscope and other record labels were looking at Adele and they were like, we need a crooner. Like, we need a powerful crooner, and she's got ballads. And so they put her out there in that dress. But dude, when you listen to half of this album, it is like hip hop influenced. It is all over the place, and it has swagger, like Giant Mountain Dew and Off to the Races and Radio. Like there's bop to this album, and I stand by. Like, if somebody had the foresight in her A&R team or management team or whatever to insist, sure, do the hit, do the viral song, and then put her out there in a completely different outfit and show a different side of her where she goes out there and just has swagger, it would have I think it would have been a totally different story that we're talking about. Totally different story. And so what winds up happening is like this album is kind of maligned. She's a joke, you know, like I think it was Daniel Radcliffe. Like I think he was the host and he winds up like defending her on Twitter. And it turns into a whole thing. But she has gone on like in retrospective or like they look back and they're like, oh, there's a lot going on here.
And her longevity and popularity now has far outlasted any of the jokes or negativity or, you know.
Right. And it has its hits or misses, and you can see, as does her discography now, because she puts out an extensive body of work at this point. I think she's like on album 8 or 9, and we're 10 years in. And it's all over the place. I mean, there's definitely songs and even whole albums where I'm like, this isn't for me. But there's an inception point of what is about to happen with her and what is happening in female-fronted, dominated music at this point that she is such an important part of, and it just hit for me. Like, I had lost, I mean, the other albums that I'm talking about, like, again, Red aside, like, the other albums that I was listening to were rock albums, and they were like indie rock albums. I was getting into the National and whatever, you know, but like there's this pop sensibility of this quote unquote indie singer that just floored me. There's something super special about her. And so Lana Del Rey, Born to Die, my 2012 pick for our album of the year.
Awesome. Well, I need to go back and listen to that for sure. I'd listened to it a bit at the time, and I recognized it for, you know, I think a lot more than what most people. I was able to listen to it objectively and get the scope of it. But that was a long time ago, and I wonder if it'll hit different now. It wasn't something that, you know, I didn't necessarily become a fan at that point or anything.
There's a reissue that they did when they were like relaunching her, and there's an EP called Paradise, and it's got like 8 songs or something on it. It's pretty extensive. And again, a few misses on it, but I think if you ever do that where you like look at some B-sides of an album or something, and you're like, okay, man, if you had just like swapped this for that and this for that, you'd have the perfect album.
Why is this
there's
a B-side?
I know. There's like, so basically that's what this is. And so there's like 3 songs in Paradise that I'd swap for 3 songs on Born to Die, and it's a perfect album.
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
So I think she's great. Again, I'll still dip my toe in from time to time. She's a crazy, weird, like she just does her own thing.
Yeah.
seen her live a couple times. She really puts on it's a production. It's fun.
Awesome.
And dude, like I got dressed up to see her, you know, like I did white t-shirt, jean jacket. Like my wife got done up. Like we Lana Del Rey'd ourselves to go see Lana Del Rey. It's kind of fun.
That's
it's
awesome.
Like, yeah. All right. So we're present day, right? Wrapping out the year.
Here we go.
2022.
We've had a global pandemic.
Yeah.
A couple of presidents have come and gone, probably.
Yes.
And 2022. Here we are.
Yeah. Now this, I will admit, I could change this. And again, going back to what we talked about before, like looking back on last year and being like, do I still feel that way? Like this is so fresh.
Yes.
I have an answer, but I'm even now questioning myself.
Well, the recency bias is hard to contend with when you're talking about, especially for, you know, a podcast like ours where we're not trying to be on the bleeding edge and cover all the new artists and the best, hottest thing. You know what I mean? We're a look back at what's tried and true, what has stood the test of time type of media. So this is always a little bit kind of
departure.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. I was going to say off brand, but I stopped myself because we still talk about current albums and current artists.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of an interesting year, right?
Some big ones, dude.
Some big ones, because a lot of these albums that came out started being produced, recorded, and written pre-pandemic.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of these are albums that were 4 or 5 years in the making, with a gap in the middle where, you know, nothing could be done as a group, really.
Yeah.
Save for some, you know, sharing of ideas and files electronically. But yeah, it certainly puts a damper on the organic process of creating music as a group.
Yeah.
So naturally you have a lot of individual artists on here who, you know, more or less write music in, not so much in a bubble, but, you know, you've got Taylor Swift with probably one of the most anticipated albums of the year.
Yeah.
You've got a Beyonce album. You've got Harry Styles, Lizzo, a lot of these huge artists.
Yeah.
That, you know, it may have been something that started pre-pandemic, but, you know, they probably have such a large team that, you know, who knows how long it takes them to whip something together. Yeah. But it just feels like a weird year to me. And I don't know if that's because it was a weird year for me personally, or if it's just kind of been that way for everybody. It feels like it's been that way for everybody.
No, it definitely has. Again, like when we look through this list, there's a lot of great stuff. But I remember like looking at the Orville Peck album. Like I love Bronco. I've gone back to it a bunch. And I remember I honestly thought to myself the other day, I was like, did I have a sad cowboy year? Like was 2022 a sad cowboy year for me? Was it, you know, Florence and the Machine, like this explosive return to form in Dance Fever? Like it was amazing. Wet Leg, it's so exciting, dude, when you have a band that suddenly people that you don't expect to ask you about a band start asking you about a band. Like, hey, can I get tickets? Do you want to go to the show? Have you heard of this song? And I'm like, yeah, it came out like a year ago. What? But it's happening,
right?
You know, like there's this momentum there for a great band.
Yes.
And like you said, then like bookend that with some of the industry's biggest titans in Taylor Swift and Beyonce and Lizzo and The Weeknd, and then like the return of Kendrick Lamar. It's been 5 years, and who knew what happened after Damn? That guy is so. Like again, like Fiona Apple doing her own thing. Kendrick, in many ways, is the same way. I remember seeing him performing at the Super Bowl as part of that like collective house thing, and I remember seeing him and I'm like, yeah, he is part of that crew. Like he came up under Dre and Eminem and in that whole group, but he seemed so out of place to me, man, because I'm like, he's so not. He's just,
he doesn't seem like a Super Bowl artist.
Planet. He's just another planet. He's something totally different than what 50 Cent and Dr. Dre and Eminem and all of them embody, and Snoop and any of them, you know. I loved Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. There's a moment on that album where basically like I think it's a song off of Dance Fever. Like it's all of a sudden it's just Florence singing, and I remember I had the CD in my car and I'm like, what happened? Huh? I looked down and I'm like, no, this isn't. And it was a sample of Florence for this incredible song. It's just a fight. It's a fight between a couple, and I'd never heard anything like it before. And I went back, and it is hard to listen to because the things that they say to each other are very difficult. And I remember thinking, like listening to it 2 or 3 times, feeling spent like this couple is from the fight, and being like, God, somebody can do this with music. Like that's crazy. That's crazy.
That's wild.
Yeah. I haven't fallen in love with Midnights. I appreciate it. I get what it is. I celebrate the return of Karen O and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. That's very exciting.
Great album.
And I gotta shout out. So I love The Weeknd. I think that I wish he was a little more dynamic. And I remember when I heard about what this album was, I don't know if you're familiar with Dawn FM at all, came out right at the top of the year, and he framed it like a radio station for someone who had died and was working towards the light at the end of the tunnel. And it was supposed to be this like progression, like this theme album. And he has Jim Carrey doing the narration on this as the radio DJ of 103.5.
Oh my God.
Like, it's so good and so weird, dude.
That's wild.
And so I go into this, I think I put my expectations too high, and I'm hearing some of that, and I'm hearing things that sound like The Weeknd.
Yeah.
You know, it just sounds like his conflicted love life pop songs. And I'm like, this isn't what you promised me. Like it felt like it didn't make good on what I thought I was going into. So yeah, I don't. Where's your head at on this? Because I think I've landed on an answer. I mean, I'm going between two right now.
For me, it's kind of. I like that you're kind of doing this on the fly. I'm gonna see if what I decided on just earlier today sticks.
Oh, okay.
But this year feels fragmented to me. To think that this Always album, which came out, I think it was October, came out in the same year as the new Spoon album, which was at like the very beginning of the year. I was like, what? Like these can't be the same year.
Right.
It doesn't even that's the Smile album, The Light for Attracting Attention, that came out this year. I thought that came out last year. And it just feels really, and again, maybe it's recency bias, maybe it's just because of how weird and fragmented the year felt as it was, but it's been hard for me to kind of compare like the Spoon album that came out at the beginning of the year, the Lucius album that came out at the beginning of the year with some of these later albums like Yeah Yeah Yeahs and Always. I've been going back and forth for the past week or so between the new Always album, Blue Rev, and the new Spoon album, Lucifer on the Sofa. Spoon is my favorite band.
It's a great album.
I think this is one of their best albums.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy, 10 albums in. This is their 10th album.
Yeah, shouldn't be that way. Insanely
Consistent in what they do. This is one of the punchiest, best-sounding rock albums ever. Not a single miss on the album.
Right.
But this Always album just feels so fresh, and it's such a different recording production philosophy too, because you know with Jim Eno and Spoon doing their thing at Public Hi-Fi, and just the way that they record, you can hear every instrument and you can kind of tell what every instrument is, even when they go a little creative with some studio trickery, you can always like tell what it is and what's going on. This Always album, it feels like the entire thing is wrapped in the glow of summertime. It's crazy that they were able to take this, pretty traditional instrument lineup with guitars and bass and keyboards and drums, and just kind of made it sound like this is all coming through warm summer memories and radio static and, good vibes, for a lack of a better term. Like I kind of hate that everything is a vibe now, this vibe, that vibe, but it kind of like this album feels like they were somehow able to wrap it up in a warm blanket of good feelings, which is very needed right now. It's got a nostalgic feel to it, but it feels very fresh and very current. So I could easily, and this is kind of a new one for me. I'm not, I couldn't tell you that I was an Always fan before this album came out. I caught them by accident a few years ago when I drove up to Dallas to see Texas Homegrown Fest, I believe is what it was called. But the reason why I did the 4-hour trip with my best friend Max was to go see Explosions in the Sky in person. That was the reason that we went. But I ended up seeing Always and the Black Angels, who played before them, and now like I love those bands now. So this was an interesting year, and I love this Always album. It's still got time to grow on me, and it still has time to become forgettable and not turn into much of anything. So I think for lasting power, it's hard for me to pick something as new as this Always album and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs album, which I'm still listening to and digesting and getting to know. I think it's an excellent album, but I'm going with Spoon. Like they're my favorite band. And
so you're going with Spoon, not Always.
I'm going with Spoon for my album of the year 2022. And I really tried not to let the fact that they are my favorite band influence that. I tried to look at it all objectively.
Yeah.
And this time next year when we're doing our recap of this year's episode, I may say, you know what? I ended up listening to this Always album a lot more, and that they're like my new favorite band. We never know what's going to happen a year from now.
Yeah.
But this Spoon album should not be ignored. It's an excellent, excellent album. You could come into it never hearing Spoon before, and you could become a fan. It's super good. It's got texture like you wouldn't believe, range, some beautiful melodies, some flat out gritty rock songs. It's just a great, great rock album during a time where a lot of us thought that rock and roll is dead and they don't make good rock albums anymore.
Yeah. Or that it had to just be, like commodified in a certain way. Like it had to be packaged a certain way. Like this is just Spoon being Spoon really well. Like they just are doing their thing, their iteration of what that sounds like on their 10th album. It's just good. Yeah. And the fact that they can do this is crazy.
It's absolutely amazing what they've been able to do just in the past 20 plus years of their career. Just so consistent with the quality level and the songwriting. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
I have to shout out Danger Mouse and Black Thought. It was up there and in the running for me. It's a really, really cool and really important album.
I'm really glad it exists. Yeah.
It's incredible. I'm still digesting that one too. So I couldn't pick that as album of the year, but I hadn't mentioned it yet. So I had to bring it up just in case you weren't going to mention it. But that's another one that I'm really interested in and I'm still listening to and digesting. But yeah, there's a lot this year. Yeah. But for me,
I'm
it's
in the
Spoon.
same space. Yeah, I'm in the same space. Like I think I've said it before with Phrenology. I think Black Thought's incredible. Obviously, Danger Mouse is Danger Mouse. But I haven't sat with this enough yet. I haven't been in the right headspace for it. And there's also like hip hop had a really cool year this year. I found out very recently that there was a Black Star album put out this year, but we can't listen to it unless you sign up for like a podcast company, like a podcast service,
there's something
like a
weird
subscription
with
thing. Yeah, they put it out as episodes of a podcast that they recorded the songs in hotel rooms. And so like I love those guys, but that it's weird to gate it that way. I don't know. It feels like when Jay-Z was doing the title thing and I'm like, I'm not going to play that game. But someday I hope I get to hear your cool album. Always, by the way, I feel like, so Yeah, Yeah, Yeahs and Always are interesting. Both came out the tail end of this year. Yeah, Yeah, Yeahs, I feel like there's a celebration to having that work.
Yeah.
You know? And I feel like the conversation is, oh my God, this is great that we have more Yeah, Yeah, Yeahs. But I don't think that it pushes a boundary on that space as much as I think that, I think you're right. I mean, I don't know you're going to regret your choice. I think you made, like, this is Lucifer on the Sofa is a great choice for this year, but I do think you're right that we're going to be talking about Always next year.
Yes.
And the story is developing there. And I don't know where they go. It could be like a Big Thief thing where they just go on their trajectory and they put out music when they're ready for it. And it doesn't become, they become industry darlings, you know, like they haven't nominated for a bunch of awards, but just be that band that hones their craft.
Yeah.
Or if there's another step there. I feel like, again, like it's probably not going to be predictable here. But where I've been going back and forth on is the Harry Styles album and the Lizzo album. And
really?
yeah, and those are obviously both pop behemoths. You know, they're not like deep cuts or anything. But they both represent to me both where I'm at with my kid. She loves both of those, you know, and like she and I are bonding over really well crafted, well performed,
that's awesome.
Like personalities and songs and packages, and like she's excited to watch the Lizzo documentary, and I'm never going to get tickets to go see Harry Styles because it's bananas,
Oh my
but
gosh.
like she would love to see him, you know.
At least she's not a Taylor Swift fan yet.
I mean, she
That
and my
would've
wife
been-
really wanted
What
wanted
a
tickets to that one
disaster.
too.
Oh
I know.
my goodness.
Yeah. We don't talk about that around the house. My wife stopped listening to Midnights for a couple weeks because of that whole
Oh,
debacle.
God, I
and
don't
she
blame
just
her.
got back on board. Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
And I think ultimately, like the Lizzo album is fantastic because I didn't know. So she had this weird genesis of being this like indie alt hip hop pop star that had her moment a few years ago, and it could have just been that. And I remember celebrating and being excited and enjoying that music, but then wondering like, is there more here? Like what's the momentum? What happens next? And I remember hearing the songs roll out from this album, and I was like, oh, she found it. Like you're watching somebody who, if the cards are played right over the next 5 years, is someone that we will talk about for the next 40 years.
Wow.
But I also feel that way about Harry Styles. And Harry Styles, so I was walking into Penn Station. He did a run of shows at Madison Square Garden. I think he did like 13 or 15 shows.
Jeez.
Just a residency
Yeah.
at Madison Square Garden, dude. Like what? And to watch the people coming out of that, like as I was going under Penn Station's underneath Madison Square Garden. And so I'm approaching the building and the concert's letting out. And I walk into a convenience store and I'm in line with a bunch of people who went to it. And it's just every different kind of person. There were 40 somethings and they were teenagers and whatever. And then I am also seeing every song from this album covered everywhere. Like this is a cultural moment with this album. And it's so listenable and it's so good. And it's not what I mean. I didn't listen to One Direction.
No, right.
Did you? You know, like
no.
Why? Like, and I remember when Justin Timberlake left NSYNC, and you were like, "Cry Me a River, this is cool," and like he brought Sexy back. But like, this is beyond that.
Yeah.
There's something
Definitely seems
very
like it.
genuine and well crafted. He seems, I don't think there's much that he could do at the moment, knock on wood, to not have cemented himself at this point with this album in the conversation of the fabric of pop music going forward. So between my own personal experiences with this album, both, just in listening to music myself, listening to music with my kid, and then like looking at what this album embodies cover to cover, I have to go Harry Styles, which is crazy.
Man,
like, I didn't think I'd ever give Harry Styles.
I wouldn't have guessed. I could have guessed Lizzo. I would not have guessed Harry Styles. That's wild.
Yeah, so it was tight between the two of them. And look, Orville Peck, Florence and the Machine, Wet Leg. There's a Lupe Fiasco album that came out this year that people are sleeping on. That is like very jazz rap. That is so good. I didn't
even know. I need to look that up now.
Very, very, very good. Yeah, Lupe Fiasco is like holding it down in that indie, older dude hip hop space. But yeah, I mean, again, this list is fantastic. The Kendrick album is hard to not pick. But I think Harry Styles is somebody that, if we're doing the podcast 20 years from now, we're still talking about Harry Styles.
Still gonna be talking
and we're probably
about
still talking about this album,
It'll be interesting to see. It's honestly hasn't, I mean, I obviously know of his popularity because I don't live under a rock, but
exactly.
I don't really have any experience just sitting down and listening to it and trying to get it. You know what I mean? So that's definitely something for me to do. Hopefully before the year ends here. But wow, 2022 album of the year for Liam is Harry Styles. Harry's House.
Harry's House. There it is.
Amazing.
So you had thrown something out in Discord to you threw out a list, just like the working list of what we were looking at. And we had some cool reactions from folks. A lot of stuff that we've talked about and addressed so far.
Yeah.
But a couple things jumped out at me here, if I could just run through them real quick.
Yes.
Stevens NES had shouted out Bright Eyes Lifted or The Story is in the Soil, Keep Your Ear to the Ground. I love that Bright Eyes album. I don't think it's my favorite. Like, I love Fevers and Mirrors, Digital Ash, I'm Wide Awake, It's Morning. Like, that's more my era, but it is a very good Bright Eyes album. Shouted out the XX for 2012, which I had forgotten about.
Yeah, same.
The XX was such a moment. And they've gone on to do so much cool stuff with Jamie and Oliver and Rami. He also shouted out the Muna album this year. Loved Muna. The Bartees Strange album. And he was talking about Wet Leg in there too. We have some hard rock fans for sure.
Yeah.
In our I shouted out a bunch of that stuff before. But I know that we probably don't represent that space as well as they might want us to, but I'll also say, like, again, music is so expansive.
Yeah. There's no way
that we could touch on
exactly.
anything. Yeah. Tim, who was on with us for our Muppet Christmas Carol episode, walked through his real quick, which was cool. He had Jethro Tull, Thick as a Brick for 72.
That was a good pick.
Yeah. He had Eye in the Sky, Alan Parsons Project for 82, which I am familiar enough with it, but I probably haven't spent enough time. I have a lot of appreciation. We talked about Prague, obviously, recently, and that's a big one.
It's an interesting pick for 82. Like, you know what I mean? But very
up against
cool.
Thriller again, yeah. The Chronic, Dr. Dre, NERD I forgot about, although I don't think I know that album as well. And then Bruno Mars in 2012, and then he's got a Metroid Cinematica Recharged release from this year.
I'm glad someone's got a video game album somewhere here. We definitely needed that injection somewhere.
Yeah. I'm just
Lots
scrolling
here.
through. I think
So
I think
Dan,
there's a lot of other stuff.
my good old brother, shouted out some good stuff. He's actually the one that reminded me that Super Drag album, Last Call for Vitriol, was out in 2002. That made me feel bad as a Super Drag fan that I left it off of our initial working list. 2012, he's got Ben Folds 5, The Sound of the Life of the Mind. He's been crazy into Ben Folds 5 lately, and I'm sure we'll do something with him about that. And 2022, he's got the new Built to Spill album and the Beth's album, Expert in a Dying Field. And I think that Beth's album is a contender as well. It's not one that was in the running for album of the year for me, but, I picked it up. I think it's fantastic and deserves to be mentioned for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned the hard rock and the metalhead space. Thunderdome comes in.
I don't think we talked about Iron Maiden,
No.
which again, Maiden's not mine, but Number of the Beast is the album.
That's the album,
that's
right?
the Iron Maiden album. Yeah,
And that sums up the concept of just genres starting to really splinter off into their extremes at this time. And then 92 with Megadeth, Countdown to Extinction. He also talks about Pantera, Vulgar Display of Power. Def Leppard, Adrenalize had that album in 92. I'm not familiar with Hailstorm, but they had an album in this year. Yeah. So it's just not my space. I'm glad to shout it out, and I appreciate them kind of schooling us. We got you always. Metalheads are like the nicest people in the world. It's like
that's why I like going to those shows, because it seems like you're going to get beat up, and honestly, everybody's just super cool.
That's
like,
the shows where they help you up.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
They get all their aggression out through the music, and then they're like the chillest, nicest people on the planet.
Yeah. I forgot about this one. I see Mike Wright's mentioned Weezer's Maladroit, which. That's one where I kind of skipped it back in the day and have gone back and really appreciate that album. It's very good. Yeah, I think it's a sleeper Weezer album from that era. Yeah,
I might have to give it another chance. I feel like I've tried to give it a number of chances, but
yeah. I mean, look, you're going to be Blue Pinkerton. Like I totally understand that. It's like Mark Says Hi, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's just if Weezer was established by those two albums for you, I don't know how you listen to any other Weezer.
It's hard. Yeah.
But I came in at Green, and so like
there you go.
If I started with Green, Maladroit and Red, some of those things are a little bit more palatable.
Yep.
And there's some really good stuff on there.
Mike also shouts out my favorite They Might Be Giants album in 1992 with Apollo 18.
See, I don't know that one.
That's not generally regarded as their best, I don't think. Granted, I'm not like in with the big They Might Be Giants fan crowd, so I don't know.
That's a Mark Says Hi conversation at some point.
But Apollo 18 is definitely my favorite of theirs.
Interesting. I think Flood is usually, that's the one that I knew.
Probably.
Flood and I think Factory Showroom, like those. There's that run in the 90s of theirs. But yeah, Apollo 18, I'm looking at it now. I don't think I know this stuff. I'd have to go listen to
It's a weird one.
It's super fun.
And I love it for it.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thank you for everybody that has tuned in and for everybody that engaged with us on this stuff. Thanks for listening, and thanks for an awesome 2022. I feel like we covered a lot of ground.
Yes.
Had a lot of great conversations.
For sure. Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you, Liam, for doing this, feeling under the weather as you are.
Lifts me up.
Yeah, it definitely does the same for me, and appreciate everyone for the amazing year that we've had with the podcast. We wish you all the best. We've got some really fun and interesting things brewing in the works for the new year. Just really quick, do you have anything that you're like really looking forward to coming up in the next few months here?
Music release wise, or Nothing I can talk about. But
there's always that.
There's a lot of very good music coming out next year. I think you were talking about, like, Harry's House is a good example of something that was composed and written 2020, 2021, and finally came out.
Yeah.
I think we've cleared a lot of those pipes.
Yeah, the backlog is
people,
probably clear at this point.
Yeah, and people put in work this past year,
Yeah.
and we're getting back to this cadence. And I think that everybody that you missed putting out music this past year is coming. Like, there's some really cool things that are going to come out in 2023.
Well, the big one for me is Gorillaz. They've already released a few songs, and that's one of the few things that me and my preteen agree on musically. So we bond
awesome.
over Gorillaz, and we're looking forward to the new Gorillaz album. But there's always going to be surprises and long anticipated things to look forward to, both musically and just as the year progresses. All I have left to say is Happy New Year, everybody, and I hope you have an amazing 2023. We will be back in January with new episodes and new fun stuff, and this will be a fun playlist, I'll tell you that much. Don't forget to check out the playlist, create a playlist for the episodes, both
wall-to-wall
for
bangers.
Apple and Spotify. And shout us out. Tell us what you want us to talk about in 2023. You can hit us up on Twitter at retrogroove _ pod, and come hang out with us on the somewhat slightly redesigned Discord. We are part of the RetroLogic family, so we're on the RetroLogic Discord, and we have a nice new sleek black theme for our channels within the server. So come hang out, talk about music, tell us what you've been listening to, what you're looking forward to, what you'd like us to talk about. We'd be happy to
shout
wrap
out to
with you.
Steven. Shout out to Steven, by the way. We did an end of the year giveaway alongside some of the other RetroLogic shows.
Yeah.
And gave away some cool records and stuff. And we do a lot of that. A lot of it's video game centric, but planning on doing some more music centric stuff throughout the year as well. So I just packed up his New Year's, Christmas, whatever present. So yeah, shout out to Steven. Thanks for listening. Thanks for entering. And I hope you like these records, dude.
Congrats, Steven. Some bangers in there. You've got my album of the year in there.
That's right. Didn't even know that was going to happen.
I
could have guessed.
Yeah, probably could have guessed. But again, thank you all so much for listening to Retro Groove. We will see you next time. Adios.
Later.